Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. I hope the week's gone well. We've had tremendous rain all around the last 2 nights. It's been really dramatic, lightning and bucket loads of rain. And given that we haven't had water in Nairobi for weeks on end, it's a welcome relief, I must say. Macro thoughts: an inverted yield curve, a clear sign investors see an impending recession, maybe just around the corner. Take a look at the yield curve, and it's sending a very interesting message. Is Bitcoin surge a bubble or just the beginning? Asks Bloomberg. Jamie Dimon says, I'm not going to talk about Bitcoin anymore. JS Blockland, Bitcoin powers ahead, market cap close to $100 billion for the first time ever. Bitcoin prices are up more than 400% this year, eclipsed $5,000 on Thursday, and currently at $5,500. Interesting. Far and away the largest cryptocurrency, 11 other coins have a market cap in excess of $1 billion, reflecting increasingly diverse trading options, which is a good point. Home thoughts: George Santayana. An artist is a dreamer consenting to dream of the actual world. That took me back to August 2015 when we were at Diani Beach, and Hannah and I spent hours just swimming in the sea. I took this photo of her, somebody took a photo of me standing and her in the sea. The world is not respectable, it is mortal, tormented, confused, deluded forever. But it is shot through with love, beauty, with glints of courage and laughter. And in these the spirit blooms timidly and struggles to the light amid the thorns. One other quote from him: history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there. History is always written wrong, so always needs to be rewritten. And one more quote, this time Sun Tzu: supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. I like this photograph from Peter Size 8, sailing in Lamu, one of the best ways to spend your time if you're ever there. Haven't been there for a while, like to get back. Look inside the most expensive house on earth. South of France has been home to a revolving door of the super rich for the past century. As their fates rose, industrialists, princes and bankers built palaces along the Mediterranean. And as they fell, first the Russian aristocracy, Americans after the 1929 stock market crash, then much of the European upper class after World War II, they sold them to the world's next crop of newly wealthy. Now the owner of Villa Les Cèdres, a 187-year-old, 18,000 square foot, 14-bedroom mansion, set on 35 acres, hopes that its property will be the next to pass from old money to new. With a list price of 350 million euros, the owner, the Italian distillate Davide Campari Milano, is betting that the house's combination of history, luxury, and a prime location along the coast of Saint-Jean-Cap Ferrat will be enough to make it the most expensive residential sale in history. Elon Musk's SpaceX successfully launched another reused rocket. That took me back to a screaming comes across the sky. Gravity's Rainbows, a 1973 novel by Thomas Pynchon, which is about the design, the production and dispatch of V-2 rockets by the German military. In particular, it features the quest undertaken by several characters to uncover the secret of a mysterious device named the Schwarzgerät, the black device, slated to be installed in a rocket with serial number 00000. As the world watches Pyongyang, I cannot help wondering if Kim Jong-un has read Pynchon speaks of a screaming coming across the sky from North Korea. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola. They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. From the New York Times, a North Korean propaganda poster reads, "If war breaks out in this country again, the US will not be safe." 18th of September, I wrote about how Pyongyang is in fact a near-perfect geopolitical attack dog when you look through Chinese eyes. Consider that Pyongyang is a buffer state between China and the US, and that Pyongyang is in fact a near-perfect geopolitical attack dog. The attack dog is not on a Chinese leash, but is surely aligned with a resurgent rising China, whose aim is surely to eject the US and its allies from what it considers its sphere of influence. Just take a look at the South China Seas, where the US and its allies have largely capitulated, and the US is now left performing some half-hearted and quite forlorn FONOPs once in a blue moon. North Korea, by lobbing those missiles over Japan, is seeking to prize Japan away from the US alliance, something that China is surely trying to achieve as well. When you look at geopolitical alignment, it is entirely unlikely that the West has anything to offer the Chinese that can compensate them for the loss of their hinterland, their buffer, and their instrument of attack. Very interesting piece in The Economist. The world's most powerful man, Xi Jinping, has more clout than Donald Trump. American presidents have a habit of describing their Chinese counterparts in terms of awe. Of fawning, Richard Nixon said to Mao Zedong that the chairman's writings had changed the world. To Jimmy Carter, Deng Xiaoping was a string of flattering adjectives: smart, tough, intelligent, frank, courageous, personable, self-assured, friendly. Bill Clinton described China's then President Jiang Zemin as a visionary and a man of extraordinary intellect. Donald Trump is no less wowed. The Washington Post quotes him as saying that China's current leader, Xi Jinping, is probably the most powerful China has had in a century. That's correct. Mr. Trump may be right, and were it not political suicide for an American president to say so, he might plausibly have added, Xi Jinping is the world's most powerful leader, and basically talking about how the president of the world's largest authoritarian state, by contrast, walks with swagger abroad, presenting himself as an apostle of peace and friendship. He's sitting on the world's largest stockpile of foreign currency to back him up. His Belt and Road Initiative may be puzzlingly named, but its message is clear. Hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese money are to be invested abroad in railways, ports, power stations, and other infrastructure that will help vast swathes of the world to prosper. That is the kind of leadership America has not shown since the post-war days of the Marshall Plan in Western Europe, which was considerably smaller. Saying he's not a global troublemaker who seeks to subvert democracy and destabilize the West, but saying he's too tolerant of troublemaking by his new brandishing ally North Korea, but we just talked about that. Saying at home his instincts are at least as illiberal as those of his Russian counterpart. Mr. Xi may think that concentrating more or less unchecked power over 1.4 billion Chinese in the hands of one man is, to borrow one of his favorite terms, the new normal of Chinese politics, but it is not normal, it is dangerous. No one should have that much power. One-man rule is ultimately a recipe for instability in China, as it has been in the past. Think of Mao and his Cultural Revolution. It is also a recipe for arbitrary behavior abroad, which is especially worrying at a time when Mr. Trump's America is pulling back and creating a power vacuum. The world does not want an isolationist United States or a dictatorship in China. Alas, it may get both. 28th of August, I wrote a piece about China rising. I was talking about its parabolic rise as being simply breathtaking. Oh, bore, binds the world to Beijing because all the roads and railways have but one destination, and that is China. I was saying Washington is metasized into an epicenter of risk. Donald Trump refers and talk of a unipolar US-dominated world have largely evaporated, and I was talking about it being a trifecta: Russia, China, US. Then I was saying, apart from a few half-hearted and timid FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations, China has established control over the South China Sea. It has created artificial islands, then militarized those artificial islands across the South China Sea. And then I said it's a mind-boggling geopolitical advance any which way you care to cut it. In Pakistan, it's leased the Gwadar port, the port in Sri Lanka, Hambantota port, Djibouti. I'm saying they've sprung the trap. China was reported as opposing US provocation in the South China Sea. The Chinese Defense Ministry on Wednesday voiced strong opposition to the unauthorized entry of a US warship into China's waters off the Xisha Islands in the South China Sea. Chinese Navy dispatched a missile frigate, 2 fighter jets, and a helicopter to warn the US ship away, the ministry said in a statement. This is the Shafi, but it did not get within 12 kilometers of the island. Russian probe now investigating Cambridge Analytica, Trump's psychographic data gurus. And this is what I was saying. We have a deviate. Clearly there was a very sophisticated, predominantly digital program of interference with the election. Sheryl Sandberg, things happened on our platform in this election that should not have happened. Quite right. Trump's horrifying Iran deal gambit. President Trump is creating another crisis, and this could be the worst of all. It's planning next week to begin pulling the US out of the agreement made with the nations of the world to stop Iran's nuclear program. He reportedly will say that the accord, the product of years of exhaustive negotiations that was approved unanimously by the United Nations Security Council in 2015, is not in the US's national interest. Hardly anyone agrees with him, including his Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who told the Senate on Tuesday that the accord is in the national security interest. Anything with Obama's name on it raises a red flag. The writer concludes by saying, this is not a dream, but a nightmare. Then I learned that Saudis could be seeking Russian bailout in Yemen. I thought that was interesting. We also learned the US has withdrawn from UNESCO. Vanity Fair is reporting that he said, I hate everyone in the White House, and his advisors are fearing that he's unraveling. Alabama was a huge blow to his psyche. A person close to Trump said he saw the cult of personality was broken. There have been few movie executives as dominant or as domineering as Harvey Weinstein. Since the establishment of the first studios a century ago, there have been few movie executives as dominant or as domineering as Harvey Weinstein. Terrible story. There are over 3 million Muslim Americans if they all went out and bought semi-automatic firearms. It's a tweet I came across. It took 21 years and we're finally back to right below the halfway mark. This is the Nikkei 225. Currency markets, euro dollar 118.26, bit soft, dollar index 92.97, Japanese yen back below 112, 111.86, Swiss franc 0.9750, the pound 133 the figure. The Australian dollar has just popped through 0.7842 loss. India rupee 64.915. South Korean won 1129.62. Brazilian real 317.05. Egyptian pound 17.6280. And the South African rand 13.4336. Dollar index. This is a chart from T commodity. I think the wage inflation number was not an aberration and is a harbinger of higher inflation. So I'm looking for the dollar to continue its upward march, but in a very non-linear manner. Euro versus the dollar, 118.26. I think they're going to withdraw QE very slowly, and therefore I'm looking for us to go back to 114.50. However, core data is showing very strong. Euro area industry surges 1.4% in August. The sector looking better now, headed for its best year since 2011. Draghi opened the conference with dovish remarks as negative rates have been a success, at least for stock market, I would add, says Holger. Commodity markets, gold, where are we? 1297.35 trading last. Looking to regain 1300. I think it's more about geopolitics than anything else. Crude oil, that's moving up sharply, $51.50. That's all about Kurdistan, I think. Hey Google, our breasts aren't sexual. As Mail and Guardian is a story. They noticed that something strange was happening to many of the videos that showed their bare breasts. They were being marked as age restricted by YouTube or taken down entirely as if the content was somehow sexual in nature. This is all about Swaziland, the last Reed dance, and they feel it's cultural and Google is censoring them unnecessarily. Simple Sudanese citizen thanks Donald Trump because he lifted the sanctions from Sudan. Very interesting piece on the BBC, The Death of the Nile, the world's longest river is sick and getting sicker. Lavrov tweeted, Russia-Burundi relations developed in an atmosphere of trust, which provides basis for effective cooperation. Interesting. Bloomberg, Africa's economic future depends on its farms. You can say that again when the economies of Nigeria and South Africa recently rebounded. It wasn't oil or minerals that did the trick, it was agriculture. Faster and more sustainable agricultural growth is crucial not only to the continent's economy, but also to its ability to feed and employ its surging population. Agriculture still accounts for a quarter of GDP and as much as 2/3 of employment in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, agricultural growth has the biggest impact on non-farm income in reducing poverty. Unfortunately, Africa's agricultural productivity is about half the global average, while population pressures and intense cultivation have degraded 65% of its cropland and 30% of its pasture. African agriculture, which is overwhelmingly rain-fed, is also uniquely vulnerable to climate change. I saw some statistics showing 18 out of the 20th hardest hit countries by climate change are in Africa. Growing more food in a more sustainable way will require buy-in from small plot farmers who account for 90% of all farms in sub-Saharan Africa. While there were 3 farms for every city dweller, growing more food in a more sustainable way will require buy-in from small plot farmers who account for 90% of all farms in sub-Saharan Africa. While there were 3 farmers for every city dweller in 1990, rapid urbanization means that by 2020, one farmer will have to feed 2 of his or her urban counterparts, even as regional famines have revived debate about the need to scale up agribusiness. Making small-scale farming more productive, sustainable and profitable will remain key to feeding and employing the continent. Ranking African countries by wealth per person, 3 beat China, 17 beat India, South Africa is 6th, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, similar. That's RenCap man. South African all shares up 14% so far this year. Dollar versus Rand last trading at 13.4336. That's rebounded a little bit. Egypt is extending its state of emergency for 3 months starting Friday. Look at this correlation between Chinese data and Nigerian PMI. That's from David Inglis. Nigerian all share up 36.68% year to date. Ghana's preparing a $1.4 billion equivalent bond sale to clear its energy debt. They're holding roadshows in the US and London to sell 6 billion cedis in local currency debt to clear arrears owed to banks by state-owned electricity and petroleum utilities. The sale is the first tranche of a plan to sell as much as 10 billion cedis through a special purpose vehicle. Interest rates are attractive. That will be an attractive bond to buy, I think. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 35.24% so far this year. I like this from Riding Safari. Adrift in a sea of sand, this sublime Namib, seeing Namibia differently. Somalia, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the Armed Forces have resigned. Quartz Africa, African oligarchs do a lot more than accepting bribes. What we unearthed indicated that these elites have to some extent morphed into the very colonialist plunder structures that they replaced. In Togo, for instance, the highly strategic phosphate sector is managed from the office of the president, Faure Gnassingbe, selling it to whomever they want and at which price they want. The widespread poverty in the West African countries now at the centre of protests calling for the president, who is in his third term, to leave office. In Botswana, AIPC says that the President Ian Khama controls the lucrative tourism industry through the control of key agencies along with his relatives and friends. Mozambique, where villages in Montepuez region were violently removed from ruby fields licensed to generals and ministers. In Burundi, generals and powerful businessmen have developed patronage systems within the government, bagging contracts and exporting large caches of unaccounted for gold annually. In Rwanda and DR Congo, the ruling party and family respectively privately control and invest in almost all sectors of the economy. In DR Congo, Kabila's family, especially his siblings, has established a vast business empire that has interests in dozens of companies and brings in hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Let's move on to Kenya. What happens next in Kenya's political crisis is anyone's guess. Bloomberg. There is no precedent, there is no legal provision, there is no constitutional provision for what is happening now in Kenya. This is Robert Besley. There is no way you can lay out a definite forecast for Kenya's electoral process at the moment. I have no idea how this is going to end. There are just too many variables, Amit Salim. If the election doesn't happen after November 1, we're really in a constitutional crisis. The Supreme Court remains a curveball, especially, these are my thoughts, especially because they characterize the IEBC's contumacious disobedience, but did not set out a roadmap. So the challenge is, where we have a rinse and repeat, what will their reaction be? However, I expect the election to be held on the 26th for more low-level street-based responses thereafter. Why Chebukati must rise to the occasion? He always reminds me of a rabbit caught in the headlights. To have one flawed election in a year is destabilizing enough. To have two would be a provocation, says the FT. I wrote a piece about how politics are landing blows on the economy, and so what is clear is that the advantage of incumbency in fact accelerates in this round two of the election. Therefore, I expect the opposition to boycott the election entirely. I wrote that on Sunday, and that the strategy of tension will be maintained by denigrating and degrading the entire process. And I said market participants needed to model this scenario because this is the direction of travel, as it's subsequently proven. Mobile payments in August posted the largest month-on-month drop this year, coming after intensive political campaigns in July. That's a good indicator of what the economy is doing. The worst outcome for opposition leader Mr. Raila Odinga in Kenya is that the election goes ahead without him, says The Economist. Right now, this also looks to be the most likely outcome, says Tristan McConnell, couldn't agree more. In my weekend piece, I was talking about when the stock market had to introduce circuit breakers, and I said that day we got a chance to look at what a cliff edge looks like and cliff edge effects. In the same article, I was quoting Virilio talking about how the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production but in the street. Kenya's government has banned protests from city centres, organisers to be liable for damage. And that's a good development on my view. Have a look at this, White Walkers checking into the CBD. This is from the Wall Street Journal's Insta feed. The photo of the day is this dog on a protest in Kenya. The opposition leader was visiting the UN Deputy Secretary General, former UN Deputy Secretary General Lord Mark Malloch Brown, whom I met, and who told me about the time when he was at the UN and he was talking to Raila Odinga, and President Obama had just become president, and he walks over because he knows Malloch Brown, and Malloch Brown says congratulations to the first African-American president, and Raila Odinga said actually I was the first, that I wasn't allowed to take office. Nairobi all share up 19.32% so far this year, but it's off 8.284% off its 2017 high of August 28th. I said the equity market is currently a rabbit trapped in the political headlights. Volumes have sunk. That's a fact. NSE 20 is up 14.25% so far this year, and that's fallen 11.518% since August 15, which was its high for the year. Finally, if you haven't seen our video of the herd of elephants at sunrise from Finch Hattons, that's the last link on Rich Wrap-Ups. Do click on it. It's really good. Once again, thank you for stopping by.